My husband left me a note in the kitchen. I'm done with you and your boring life. I thought it was a breakup until the cop showed up holding his wallet. Ma'am, do you recognize this? It was found on a burned out car at the border. I came home that evening exhausted, balancing a grocery bag in one arm while nudging the front door open with my hip. It had been one of those days, the kind that left you drained and eager to just kick off your shoes, pour a glass of wine, and pretend the world outside didn't exist. Jonah's car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual. He often worked late, and lately, he had been leaving earlier and coming home later. I've been chalking it up to stress, long hours, tight deadlines. The usual excuses, but something felt off the second I stepped inside. The air felt empty. It was hard to explain, but it was like the house itself knew something I didn't. I set the groceries down on the counter and reached for my phone. Maybe I'd call him, ask if he wanted me to heat up leftovers. Just as I unlocked the screen, my eyes landed on a folded piece of paper propped against the coffee maker. Jonah's handwriting. A strange chill ran down my spine before I even read the words. I'm done with you and your boring life. Don't look for me. I read it twice. 3 times. What? For a moment, all I could do was stare at it. My breath caught somewhere between confusion and disbelief. This had to be a joke. A prank. Maybe some ridiculous fight I didn't even realize we were having. I grabbed my phone and called him. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Slowly, I moved through the house, checking for any sign that he had packed up and left for good. His closet? Mostly full. His shoes? Still by the door. But then I noticed the smaller things, the essential things, were gone. His toothbrush. His passport. The worn duffel bag he took on business trips. That's when it really hit me. Jonah wasn't coming back. And yet, something wasn't adding up. I had imagined 1,000 ways our marriage could go wrong. Maybe he'd cheat. Maybe we'd have an ugly fight and call it quits. But this? Leaving a note and vanishing like a ghost. That wasn't Jonah. Not the man I knew. I should have been devastated, heartbroken. Instead, I was angry. For 10 years, I had built a life with this man. Stood by him. Supported him. And now he decided to just leave? Without a conversation? Without so much as a goodbye? I was still sitting at the kitchen table, gripping that pathetic excuse for an explanation when a knock came at the door. Sharp. Firm. Not Jonah. A strange, uneasy feeling settled in my stomach as I walked toward the door and pulled it open. 2 police officers stood on my porch. Mrs. Calloway? The male officer had a serious expression, the kind that immediately told me something was wrong. Yes? The female officer held out a small, black item. A wallet. Jonah's wallet. I felt my stomach drop. Ma'am, she said carefully, do you recognize this? I took it with shaking fingers, flipping it open. His ID was still inside. A few crumpled bills. Yes, I managed. It's my husband's. Where did you find this? The officers exchanged a glance. It was recovered from a burned-out car near the border. For a moment, I was sure I had misheard. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. Burned-out car? The male officer nodded. We're still investigating, but we need to ask. When was the last time you saw your husband? I felt suddenly dizzy. This morning? No, yesterday morning. He had left for work before I woke up. No text. No call. And then the note. The note. Jesus. I haven't seen him, I admitted. I got home about an hour ago and found this. I held up the note. The female officer took it, scanning the words with a frown. And you didn't speak to him at all before this? No. His phone is off, too. I don't understand. What exactly happened? The male officer hesitated. The car was found abandoned and burned beyond recognition. There were no remains inside, but the fire was deliberate. My blood ran cold. Jonah wasn't just gone. Something had happened to him. Or, worse, he had done something. My mind started racing. Who the HLL was my husband? The next morning, the police came back. This time, they weren't just asking questions. They had footage. Ma'am, we need you to take a look at something, the female officer said, setting a laptop in front of me. The grainy video played from what looked like a gas station surveillance camera. My breath caught in my throat as I saw Jonah, clear as day, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. They were arguing. Jonah looked furious. The other man looked nervous. Then, out of nowhere, Jonah threw a punch. A hard one. The stranger stumbled back, holding his jaw. Jonah grabbed him by the front of his shirt, saying something I couldn't hear. The timestamp? 2 hours before his wallet was found in that burned car. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. What is this? The officer studied me. You tell us. I don't know who that is. I don't know anything about this. Except that wasn't exactly true, was it? Because something had been off about Jonah for months. He had been distant, short-tempered, always checking his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. I had assumed it was work stress. Now I wasn't so sure. And I wasn't the only one looking for answers. 2 days later, my doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't the police. It was a woman. She was around my age, maybe a little younger, with sharp cheekbones and sleek dark hair. There was something about the way she looked at me, like she knew me, even though we'd never met. I opened the door slowly. Can I help you? Her expression was tight. Are you Olivia Calloway? I hesitated. Yes. She exhaled sharply, like she'd been holding her breath. Right? Okay. Well, this is about to be a nightmare, so let's just get it over with. My stomach twisted. I'm sorry, what? She crossed her arms. My name is Camille. I waited. She stared at me for a long moment. And then, I'm Jonah's fiancé. It felt like the ground ripped out from under me. I clutched the doorframe for support. That's not possible. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Yeah, well, that makes two of us. I was going to be sick. Jonah had a whole other life. And the worst part? She had her own note. I'm done with this. Don't look for me. Almost the exact same words Jonah had left for me. Only hers had been written 2 weeks ago. Who the HLL was my husband. And if he wasn't the one in that burned car, well, the HLL was he. For a long time, Camille and I just stood there, staring at each other like two people who had just discovered they'd been living the same nightmare without knowing it. Finally, she let out a bitter sigh. Can I come in? I should have said no. I should have slammed the door in her face. But I needed to know. I stepped aside. She walked in like she had something to prove, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors. I watched as her eyes scanned my house. The framed wedding photos, the neat kitchen, the little signs of a life I thought I had built with Jonah. She turned back to me, her arms crossed. So, how long were you married to him? 10 years, I said, my voice hollow. And you? Camille let out a sharp, humorless laugh. 2. Engaged for 3 months. At least I thought I was. 2 years. Meaning Jonah had been leading a double life for at least that long. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I tried to process it all. How did you find me? I didn't, she admitted, taking the seat across from me. The police did. After I reported him missing, they put me in contact with you. I stared at her. She stared back. We were both the wives of a man who wasn't who he claimed to be. Camille pulled something from her purse and slid it across the table. A folded piece of paper. I already knew what it was before I even opened it. His note to her. The words were nearly identical to mine. I'm done with this. Don't look for me. Did you get one too? She asked. I nodded, feeling sick. Jonah hadn't just left me. He had left both of us. And now he was missing. Camille's voice was tight when she spoke again. I don't know what kind of game he was playing, but I'm done being the fool. I looked at her carefully. What do you mean? She leaned in, her dark eyes flashing. I mean, I don't believe for a second that he just walked away from all this. And I think you don't either. She was right. I didn't. Camille straightened. So, are we going to find him? I should have said no. I should have let the cops handle it. But I didn't trust them. Not after they had come to my house with half-truths and vague warnings. Jonah had left both of us high and dry. And I was done sitting around waiting for answers. I took a deep breath. Yeah, I said, we're going to find him. Camille and I weren't exactly friends, but we became something close to it over the next few days, co-conspirators. She had a lot of the same questions I did. How long had Jonah been living this double life? What was he really involved in? And most importantly, where the HLL was he? The police weren't giving us much. It's an ongoing investigation. They kept repeating like that was supposed to mean something. So we started digging on our own. Camille had met Jonah, or Elliot, as she called him, at a high-end bar in Miami. He was charming, generous, swept her off her feet. He had told her he was in real estate. I nearly choked when I heard that. Real estate? I repeated. She nodded. Why? What did he tell you? I hesitated. Finance. He worked in finance. Camille scoffed. Of course he did. Jonah, Elliot, hadn't just been juggling 2 women. He had been juggling 2 identities. The more we compared notes, the more obvious it became that nothing about our husband was real. Not his past, not his career, not even his name. And then Camille found something that changed everything. She called me in the middle of the night, her voice shaking. You need to come over. Now. I drove to her condo, my pulse racing the entire way. She was waiting for me at the door, her face pale. Without a word, she led me inside and handed me her laptop. A bank statement was pulled up on the screen. Look at the deposits, she said. I scanned the numbers. And then, I froze. The last deposit was $500,000. Made 2 days before Jonah disappeared. My mouth went dry. Where the HLL did he get that kind of money? Camille swallowed. I don't know, but that's not the worst part. She clicked another tab, pulling up an email. It was from an unfamiliar name. Subject, your cut. Camille's hands trembled as she scrolled down. The email was short, direct. I held up my end. Now it's your turn. This isn't over until I say it is. I felt a slow, cold dread creep over me. Camille, where did this email come from? She shook her head. It was in Jonah's account. I only found it because he logged in on my laptop once and saved the password. We looked at each other, the same horrifying realization sinking in. Jonah hadn't just been lying to us. He had been involved in something dangerous, something criminal, and now someone wanted their money. Or worse, revenge. I exhaled shakily. We need to go to the cops. Camille stared at the screen, then back at me. No, she said quietly. I frowned. What? She shut the laptop. If we go to the cops, they'll shut us out. They'll take over and leave us with nothing. I hesitated. But I need to know what he did. Her voice was low, firm. I need to know who my fiancé really was. I studied her carefully. She wasn't just looking for answers. She was looking for payback. And the scary part? So was I. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said. Then we do this ourselves. Camille nodded. And we start with whoever the HLL sent that email. I had spent 10 years thinking I knew my husband. Turns out, I didn't know a damn thing. Camille and I sat in silence for a long time, the weight of what we had just uncovered settling over us like a storm cloud. Our husband, our Jonah, her Elliot, hadn't just been lying about who he was. He had been involved in something much bigger, something dangerous. And now, he was either running from it or paying the price for whatever deal he had made. We need to find out who sent that email, I finally said, breaking the silence. Camille nodded. I have a contact. I raised an eyebrow. A contact? She smirked. I may have done some questionable things to dig into his past before. Nothing illegal, she added quickly, but let's just say I have resources. I stared at her. She stared back. And just like that, we had a plan. It didn't take long for Camille's contact to dig up the details we needed. The email had come from Derek Langford, a name neither of us recognized. But the bank statement? That told us everything we needed to know. The money had come from a shell company, a fake business, likely used for laundering money. Jonah, Elliot, hadn't just been lying to us. He had been running a scam, stealing money, moving it around. And when it was time to pay up, he vanished, leaving us behind to deal with the mess. Not happening. Camille and I spent the next 2 weeks tracking Derek down. Turns out he was a loan shark. Not just any loan shark, one that operated in high-stakes real estate deals, the kind where millions disappeared overnight. And Jonah? He had taken $500,000 from Derek's operation and never looked back. Until now, because Derek was looking for his money. And when he couldn't find Jonah, he started looking for us. It happened on a quiet afternoon. I was leaving the grocery store when I noticed them. A black SUV parked across the street. The same car that had been parked outside my house the night before. I called Camille immediately. You're being followed too? She asked, her voice eerily calm. My stomach twisted. So you've noticed? 3 times this week. We were being watched. Which meant one thing. Derek was done waiting. And if we didn't act fast, we would never get out of this. I met Camille at a cafe the next morning. She was already there, sipping a black coffee like we weren't about to risk everything. I slid into the seat across from her. We need to end this. She nodded. I have an idea. I listened as she laid it out. It was risky. It was dangerous. But if it worked, Jonah would finally pay for what he had done, and we would walk away free. That part was easy. Once we figured out where the money had gone, we knew where he would be. Mexico. Cancun, to be exact. Living under a new name. New house. New life. Same old Jonah. The man had stolen $500,000, and instead of keeping his head down, he was drinking cocktails on the beach. We booked our flights immediately. The moment we arrived, we saw him. He was sitting at a beachfront bar, wearing sunglasses like he was some kind of celebrity in hiding. Camille turned to me. Are we really doing this? I exhaled slowly. HLL, yes. We approached the bar like we were 2 tourists looking for a drink. Jonah didn't notice us at first. Then Camille spoke. Long time no see. He froze. His head snapped toward us so fast I thought he'd get whiplash. The color drained from his face. And for the first time in 10 years, I saw something I had never seen in Jonah before. Fear. He stood abruptly. How did you? Sit. Camille interrupted. Jonah hesitated. Then he sat. His eyes darted between us. Listen, I can explain, don't, I said coldly. We don't want to hear it. He swallowed. Camille leaned in. We know everything, Jonah. Elliot. The money. The scams. Derek Langford. Jonah flinched at the name. Gotcha. We should be calling the cops, I continued. We should be telling them everything. Jonah's jaw clenched. You wouldn't. Camille smiled. Wouldn't we? Jonah exhaled shakily, running a hand through his hair. Listen, I had to do it. It was either me or them. You stole $500,000, I snapped. Then you ran. Jonah's lips pressed into a thin line. I was going to come back for you. Camille laughed. Actually laughed. That's the best lie you've told so far. Jonah's eyes darkened. What do you want? Camille and I exchanged a look. Then I slid a phone across the table. We recorded everything, I said. Your confession? That's evidence. Jonah's face paled. If you don't do exactly what we say, Camille added, this goes to the police. To Derek. To everyone. Jonah swallowed hard. What do you want? Camille smirked. Simple, she said. You're going to take every penny you stole and give it back. Jonah tensed. I can't. Camille's expression turned ice cold. Then Derek gets the tape. Jonah blanched. We had him, and he knew it. In the end, Jonah did exactly what we demanded. He wired every stolen dollar back to Derek's account. He thought that was the end of it, that he could disappear again. But we weren't done yet, because we sent everything to the police. The bank records, the confession, the details of every scam he had ever run. Jonah Calloway, or Elliot Rains, or whatever the HLL his name really was arrested trying to flee Mexico. And Camille and I, we walked away free. Justice had been served. No blood, no cruelty, just cold, hard consequences. And the best part? Jonah knew exactly who had done it to him. His wives. And that was the most satisfying revenge of all.